Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning in to my reflection on how I have received from God. My name is Amy Heimerl. I am the vicar at Ascension Episcopal Church up in Merrill, and I'm also the chaplain at Lincoln Hills Copper Lake Correctional Facility for youth in northern Wisconsin. It was a little over 7 years ago, and my husband had knee replacement surgery. About 3 hours post-surgery, he had his first stroke. Although I saw it happen, I really didn't know what was going on. I thought he was just wore out from the anesthesia and needed to sleep. Unfortunately, the medical professionals didn't recognize what happened either. Over the next few hours, he had 3 more strokes. He had an undetected hole in his heart, allowing clots to travel to his brain. The trauma of that on his brain caused a brain bleed. I remember the doctor in the small Northwoods hospital where we were telling me that he had had multiple strokes and that she did not know what the future held. It's probably good that I didn't fully understand what that meant either, or I may have become overcome with hopelessness. I remember climbing up on his bed and laying my body over his, praying life and healing into him. I held his head in my hands and I asked for God's healing, His grace and His mercy to fill every part of the wounded spaces and restore him to health. Early the next day, he was airlifted to a large hospital and spent the next 10 days there. He is the recipient of a miracle, and today the effects of the strokes are negligible. The neurologists don't understand how he is a walking, talking, working man. I understand though. But this is supposed to be a story about my receiving from God. So I need to tell you that my healing from my husband's strokes didn't happen until quite recently. I couldn't and I didn't receive from God because I was trying to keep everything and everyone under control. I was incredibly grateful for my husband's healing, but I was also incredibly upset with the personality changes and challenges that came with the strokes. Who was this guy? Where did my husband go? Where did my children's father go? I was involved in every step of his beginning recovery, OT, PT, appointments, blood work, etc. I took a class on executive functioning and wrote lesson plans with him in mind. I crafted my prayers to tell God what I wanted, what I needed, and what would make our family whole again. I was sure that I could just pray us through it. I remember going to my church alone late one night in desperation. I was sobbing, half kneeling, half laying on the floor with clenched fists, pounding the ground under the cross where Jesus hung, crying out to him to bring healing, to bring reconciliation. I had already seen the miraculous physical healing. I wanted God to heal the rest of my husband too. I didn't know it at the time, but that's not what any of us needed then, although I could not be convinced of that by anyone who may have been brave enough to suggest this to me. For about 5 years, I lived in that place of discontentment, that place of trying to hold on to what was. Not in every area of my life, but definitely in our marriage. I didn't open my hands or my heart to accept our reality. I fought for the way things were, but there is no rewind button on life. There is no going back, no matter how much we long for it. There is only opening our hands and receiving the grace to get us through. I remember my counselor at the time suggesting that perhaps hanging on to what no longer was maybe made me feel justified in my anger about what was actually happening. She suggested that perhaps I received some sort of gratification from defining myself by our struggles. Even if I didn't verbalize the victim's favorite question, why me, I sure acted like it. And then, 2.5 years ago, everything changed. I went from why me to why not me. Everything changed because I was diagnosed with breast cancer. That wasn't my first scare. I had had 1/3 of my right breast removed a number of years earlier, but it was considered a typical hyperplasia, or stage 0. They had gotten everything with one surgery, and I pretended that I didn't worry about it anymore. I took control of my health by becoming a control freak about the food and anything else I put in or on my body. I was not going to allow myself to get sick. Yeah, that worked out well. Well, what we thought would be a simple double mastectomy, trust me, there's nothing simple about it. It turned into a long battle with multiple surgeries and 16 rounds of chemo that left me bruised and broken. The cancer had spread to my lymph nodes. It was in the midst of what I call my blessed chemo hell, when I finally learned to open my hands and receive. Mostly, I was too tired to keep my fists clenched. There were days when my only job was getting through one moment at a time. I let myself receive from God, from my family and friends, and finally, from my husband. He became my caretaker, returning the care I had given him 5 years earlier. Don't tell him, but he was probably better at taking care of me than I was of taking care of him. I remember my sleepless nights as the chemo drugs raged through my body, doing what they do. In the depths of those sleepless nights, I would go on adventures with God, glorious adventures. God would take me to places I had never been and show me things that I had never seen. Sometimes we would hash things out and I would wake up feeling like Jacob, limping my way forward through the coming days. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I was shown a vision by letting go of what I was hanging on to so tightly so that I could open my hands to receive. I wrote a book about the vision, actually, and ironically, the meaning of the story evolves for me every time I read it. God has a way of doing that, you know. I don't believe it always takes looking physical death in the eye to turn our hearts and open our hands, but that's what it took for me. First, it was my husband's brush with death and the struggle to hold on to my family that followed. And then it was my journey to the unknown future. I've known people who faced physical death, sometimes more than once, and they still refuse to receive from God. So I don't think that it is dependent on the circumstances around us. I think receiving from God is dependent on the circumstances within us. I think hearts can be turned and hands can be opened when we allow to turn our hearts and open our hands. Today I'm grateful for my blessed and horrible journey. Without it, my fists may still be clenched. Thank you, friends. Have a blessed, blessed life.